When you think of World War II, you think of tanks, massive, roaring beasts of steel clashing in the mud. And in this mechanical arena, two names echo louder than the rest: the fearsome German Tiger and the relentless American Sherman. Pop culture loves a good underdog story. We're often told that the Sherman was a flimsy metal box, a fiery death trap that relied purely on swarming the majestic, invincible Tiger tank like angry ants. You've probably heard the myth. It took exactly 5 Shermans to destroy a single German Tiger tank. But what if we told you that almost everything Hollywood taught you about these two tanks is completely wrong? To understand who really won the armored war, we need to strip away the movie magic and heroic tales. Instead, we must look at the cold, hard infographics, and dive into the dirty world of logistics and broken transmissions. It's a world where mass production and supply lines matter far more than how thick your front armor is. So, grab your wrenches, put on your safety helmets, and prepare for a very different kind of tank battle. Let's compare the ultimate apex predator of the battlefield against the undisputed king of the assembly line. Our story begins in 1942. The world was on fire, and the battlefield was rapidly evolving. Germany desperately needed a breakthrough tank, something that could effortlessly shrug off enemy fire. They wanted a machine that could destroy enemy targets from miles away with pinpoint accuracy. Enter the Panzerkampfwagen VI, better known as the Tiger. It wasn't just a tank, it was a psychological weapon. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the United States was watching the chaos unfold. They didn't share land borders with their enemies. There was no front line in their backyard. Whatever they built had to be shipped across a massive, treacherous ocean. They didn't need a heavy, unmovable steel bunker, they needed a reliable, versatile workhorse. That workhorse was the M4 Sherman. On paper, putting the Sherman against the Tiger looked like a complete joke. The Tiger weighed a massive 54 tons, while the Sherman was a relatively light 30 tons. The Tiger boasted frontal armor up to 120 mm thick, making it practically immune to standard Allied anti-tank guns of the time. The Sherman's armor was much thinner, though highly sloped to help deflect incoming hits. But wars aren't fought on perfectly clean pieces of paper. They are fought in deep mud, freezing snow, and thousands of miles away from cozy, well-lit factories. The Tiger was designed by brilliant, obsessive engineers who wanted absolute, mechanical perfection. The Sherman, on the other hand, was designed by pragmatic industrialists who just wanted massive volume. And as we're about to see, perfection is often the worst enemy of a winning war strategy. Let's talk about the Tiger's teeth. The legendary 88mm gun, originally designed as a high-altitude anti-aircraft flak cannon to shoot down bombers. Someone in Germany had the brilliant, terrifying idea to lower it and point it sideways at other tanks. The result was absolutely devastating on the battlefield. The Tiger could easily punch right through a Sherman's front armor from over 2 kilometers away. For the Allied crew inside, it felt less like a tank battle and more like facing a heavy sniper rifle mounted on tracks. Whenever a Tiger appeared on the battlefield, panic naturally spread among the ranks. Allied tank commanders quickly learned that a direct frontal assault against this beast was basically suicide. This extreme lethality birthed the lasting legend of the Tiger's absolute invincibility. But let's turn our cute little infographic around and look at the Tiger's heavy backside. All that thick armor and massive firepower came with one fatal, undeniable flaw: extreme weight. The Tiger was simply too heavy for most standard European bridges, which would literally crumble under its tracks. To cross deep rivers, it actually required a complex, specialized snorkel system just to drive underwater. And its engine, it was a notorious gas-guzzling nightmare that drank fuel at an unbelievable rate, often struggling to move the tank's immense bulk without spontaneously catching fire in the process. The Tiger's suspension system, the famous overlapping road wheels, was a marvel of smooth driving. But in the thick, freezing mud of the brutal Eastern Front, that mud would pack tightly between the wheels, freeze completely solid overnight, turning into a block of ice and completely immobilizing the massive tank. The desperate crew would literally have to chip their own tank out of the ice with pickaxes before they could even think about fighting. Furthermore, beneath that thick armor, the Tiger's internal transmission was notoriously fragile and overly complex for battlefield conditions. You couldn't just throw a Tiger into gear, it required a highly trained, delicate touch to operate. If a stressed driver shifted just a little too hard, the entire gearbox could snap, rendering the beast useless. And if a Tiger broke down, fixing it on the front lines was an absolute logistical nightmare. Because of its immense weight, you couldn't just hook it up to a standard tow truck and pull it away. It actually took two other massive heavy recovery vehicles linked together just to tow a single disabled Tiger. And what happened when those specialized recovery vehicles weren't around? Or the army was in full retreat? Often, German crews had to plant explosives and blow up their own cutting-edge tanks, just to prevent them from falling into enemy hands. All because they simply ran out of gas or snapped a gear. Imagine having to destroy your army's most expensive, terrifying weapon just because it got a flat tire. It was essentially a delicate, boutique sports car dropped into the middle of a muddy, violent demolition derby. Now, let's look at the American Sherman. It wasn't designed to duel Tigers in a one-on-one match, exploit enemy breakthroughs with speed, and be, above all, consistently reliable. The Sherman was essentially the Toyota Corolla of tanks. It wasn't the flashiest, but it worked. It started beautifully every single time you turned the key. It was relatively spacious and ergonomic inside for the crew, giving them a much better chance to quickly escape through spring-loaded hatches if the tank got hit. Speaking of getting hit, what about the famous Ronson lighter myth? The joke that Shermans lit up the first time, every time. Post-war analysis shows this is largely exaggerated. It's true that early models did have a high rate of ammunition fires when hit. But the introduction of wet stowage surrounding the ammo racks with liquid water jackets drastically reduced the burn rate to an incredibly low level. In fact, the Sherman had one of the highest crew survival rates of any tank in the entire war. And about that 5 Shermans to kill a Tiger rule. Throw it in the trash. It's a total myth. The reality was just standard doctrine when attacking any enemy position. You always bring a full platoon of 5 tanks. It's just good tactics. But the Sherman's greatest weapon wasn't its 75mm gun. Not at all. It was the massive, unstoppable assembly line in Detroit. While German factories were handcrafting Tigers meticulously, like fine luxury watches, American automotive plants were casually churning out Shermans by the thousands. They produced over 49,000 Shermans during the conflict, compared to just 1.347 Tiger is. The sheer volume was impossible to match. But the genius didn't stop there. The Sherman was specifically designed with fully standardized, interchangeable parts. If a Sherman's transmission inevitably broke down during a tough advance, a mechanic could easily unbolt it and swap a new one right there in the field in a few hours. But if a Tiger's transmission broke in the exact same way, you couldn't just reach it. You had to use a massive gantry crane to lift the entire heavy turret off first in a specialized workshop. The Sherman was also brilliantly designed with strict dimensions to fit perfectly into the holds of standard Liberty ships. It was the ultimate export weapon, ready to be easily shipped absolutely anywhere in the world. By strictly standardizing the design, the United States could easily supply not just its own massive army, but the British forces, the Soviet Red Army, and the Free French as well. It was the tank of the Allies. War, ultimately, is a brutal game of attrition. It simply doesn't matter if your tank has a 10-to-1 kill ratio. If the enemy can instantly replace their 10 destroyed tanks by tomorrow, and you can never replace your single loss. The Allied logistical tail operating behind the front lines was a true masterpiece of organization and efficiency. When a Sherman was knocked out in battle, as long as the hull was generally intact, it was immediately hooked up and towed by specialized recovery vehicles back to a massive, well-supplied rear repair depot. There, it was quickly patched up, cleaned out, repainted, and given a brand new crew. It would be sent right back to the front lines to fight again within a matter of days. A relentless cycle. The German army, on the other hand, simply didn't have the spare parts. They didn't have the safe rail lines, or the massive amounts of fuel required to maintain the giant armored beasts. By late 1944, the remaining Tigers were still terrifying, heavily armed metal pillboxes, but without fuel to run the engines, or tracks to move. They were largely immobile and trapped in place. The Allied strategy rapidly evolved. It wasn't just to shoot them head-on anymore. That was pointless. It was to call in heavy artillery, or use relentless ground attack aircraft from above, or simply outflank them completely and permanently cut off the vital fuel supply lines. Because at the end of the day, a hungry, stranded Tiger is really just a very heavy paperweight. So, after all the stats, the myths, and the broken transmissions, which tank actually won World War II? If you measure a tank purely by its ability to win a one-on-one duel in an open green field, then the German Tiger is undeniably the undisputed heavyweight champion of the entire conflict. It was a terrifying marvel of mechanical engineering that rightly struck fear into the hearts of the Allied forces. But here's the ultimate truth about global conflict: wars are almost never won in fair, one-on-one gladiatorial duels. Wars are won by logistics, robust supply chains, and the consistent reliability of your equipment day after day. They are won by the sheer, grinding industrial capacity to mass-produce weapons and keep the front line fully supplied, long after your enemy completely runs out of steam, fuel, and the spare parts needed to keep fighting. The Sherman wasn't the most heavily armored tank, nor did it boast the biggest, most terrifying gun, but it didn't need to be. It was exactly what the Allied commanders desperately needed it to be. A dependable, easy-to-fix machine that could be shipped by the thousands across the globe without breaking a sweat. And just keep rolling forward relentlessly, mile after muddy mile, until the global war was finally brought to an end. The Tiger may have won the individual battles, taking out enemies with terrifying precision and thick steel armor, but it was the relentless, swarming, incredibly reliable American Sherman that actually won the war. Thanks for watching, and remember, sometimes the absolute best weapon isn't the biggest, it's just the one that actually shows up.